Imagine walking into a humid, dimly lit local pet store just to escape a sudden downpour.
Yeah, shaking off the umbrella, looking around.
Exactly. You're wandering past rows of bubbling glass tanks, looking at a bottom-dwelling algae eater, and suddenly realizing you are staring at a biological asset.
Right, an asset that commands the same premium price and honestly the same hushed reverence as a piece of designer jewelry.
It is wild. Today, we are looking at how a random rainy day in a local fish shop spawned a full-blown philosophical blueprint for a living, breathing museum. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We have an incredibly fascinating mission today. We are taking a very brief, seemingly mundane slice of the internet and unpacking the entire hidden world it hints at.
A world a lot of people probably don't even know exists.
Totally. Our source is a digital journal entry published today, May 16, 2026, by a blogger named Ang, and the post is titled Vision for a Living Pleco Museum.
Which is actually an excerpt from a much larger ongoing series called Notes on Fishkeeping. Specifically, this is part 257.
Part 257.
Yeah, that number alone tells you so much about our guide for today. Dropping into part 257 of a journal series means we are reading the stream of consciousness of someone who has been observing this specific aquatic subculture for a very long time.
They're noticing patterns that the rest of us just walk right past.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission here isn't just to talk about fish.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
We're using Ang's post to explore the deep-seated psychology of high-end collecting, the bizarre ways human beings try to categorize the infinite variety of nature, and how we assign luxury value to living things.
It's a lot to pull from one blog post.
It really is. So to set the scene for you, the listener, Ang is taking a walk through some local fish stores during the rainy season.
Yeah, which Ang playfully dubs this specific time of year the season of Pleco.
The season of Pleco. Because the stores are suddenly flooded with a massive influx of Plecos. Now, assuming you have ever been within, 50 feet of an aquarium, you know the people.
Okay, they're everywhere.
They are those armored, sucker-mouthed catfish, always clinging to the glass.
But we are absolutely not talking about the common, brown $5 fish you buy to clean the algae off your childhood goldfish tank.
Right, not the ones from the big box pet stores.
Exactly. Ang is encountering the extreme luxury tier of this species. These are highly specific, genetically distinct variants imported from deep Amazonian river systems.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they feature stunning morphological traits. We're talking vibrant polka dots, tiger stripes, intricate armor plating.
That's gorgeous animals.
Stunning. And because of the logistical nightmare of capturing them in seasonal river rapids or the sheer difficulty of breeding them in captivity, they command an absolute premium.
Which brings us to a really striking admission from our author. Ang explicitly states right at the top of the entry, quote, "I'm not a huge fan of Plecos myself."
Yeah, which is funny for someone writing part 257 of a fish journal.
Right. And the primary reason given for this disconnect, the massive barrier to entry. Ang points out these incredibly hefty price tags, noting that they go, quote, way over MYR 100.
Right, and for context, MYR refers to the Malaysian ringgit.
Yeah, so depending on the current market, spending well over 100 ringgit on a single bottom-dwelling fish represents a massive leap.
It really does.
It is the equivalent of deciding whether to buy a casual pet or invest in a premium video game or a very nice dinner out. It completely changes the dynamic between the observer and the animal behind the glass.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly Ang captures that psychological tension of encountering a luxury item you have no intention of buying.
Yes, that tension is so palpable.
Ang is actively put off by the price tag. The text says it explicitly, and yet in the very next breath, Ang admits that these fish are still, quote, quite a sight to behold. Ang is entirely captivated by the sheer variety on display.
Makes me think about the architecture of retail. And how our brains process value.
Oh, absolutely.
You, the listener, can probably picture walking into an exclusive modern art gallery, or maybe a boutique that sells limited edition vintage sneakers.
Like the ones behind velvet ropes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see a pair of sneakers locked inside a pristine, illuminated acrylic box with a price tag of $1,000.
Right.
Now, I personally have zero desire to own a $1,000 pair of sneakers. I wouldn't even know where to wear them without getting anxious.
You'd just ruin them immediately.
Totally. But I still stop, and I still stare at the craftsmanship. I still marvel at the spectacle.
That aesthetic weight without the financial burden is a profound core human trait. We do not need to be the target demographic for a product to appreciate the culture surrounding it.
That's a great point.
The value placed on these fish by the market, that over MYR 100 price tag, acts as a psychological frame. It forces Aang to stop and look closer.
Because society is basically telling you it's important.
Exactly. When society deems something highly valuable, it demands our attention, even if we are actively resisting the urge to consume it. The price tag essentially says, look at how rare and complex this is. And Aang cannot help but obey that command.
I want you, the listener, to really think about that threshold for a second. Think about a time you looked at a hardcore hobbyist's expensive collection.
Like custom-built mechanical keyboards.
Yes. Or high-end analog audio equipment, or rare succulents. You looked at the setup and thought, I would never ever spend my own money on this, but wow, the sheer variety is mesmerizing.
It's intoxicating.
It really is. And that is the exact threshold Aang is standing at in this damp, humming fish store.
Standing at that threshold leads to a moment of total sensory overwhelm. Because Aang isn't just looking at one or two expensive fish.
Right.
The journal entry describes a staggering array of them, a visual overload brought on by this rainy season of Pleco. And when the human brain encounters that level of chaotic variety in nature, it instinctively looks for a pattern.
We have to categorize it.
Always. It looks for a system to organize the chaos.
Which leads us directly into what I found to be the most cryptic and intriguing part of this entire journal entry.
The secret language.
Yes. Aang is staring at this overwhelming wall of living luxury items and realizes that the hardcore hobbyists have developed a secret language just to make sense of it all.
It's so cool.
Aang writes that there are so many different varieties on display that they, quote, cannot even begin to identify them all by their L numbers.
The L numbers, that is the engine driving this entire subculture.
I have to admit, I was completely stuck on this concept when I first read the source material.
It's a lot to wrap your head around at first.
It is. I mean, why default to a spreadsheet system for a living animal? Why not just give them normal descriptive names like we do for every other pet? Like, my cat isn't feline 042.
That's fair, but the L number system is actually a brilliant, albeit somewhat clinical, solution to a massive biological bottleneck.
A bottleneck? How so?
Well, the L stands for Loricariidae.
Okay. Loricariidae.
Yeah. Which is the scientific family name for these suckermouth catfish. Now, decades ago, aquarium hobbyists and explorers were pulling new, distinct varieties of these fish out of South American rivers at a rate that completely outpaced formal scientific taxonomy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, scientists take years to classify, describe, and officially name a new species.
So the hobbyists couldn't just wait around for a peer-reviewed paper every time they found a fish with a new stripe pattern.
Precisely. They needed a working system now. So a German aquarium magazine called Dat Z introduced the L number system in the late 1980s as a placeholder mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you find a new variant, it gets an L number. L046 is the zebra pleco, L018 is the gold nugget pleco, and so on.
Like a barcode.
Yeah, or it functions almost exactly like the periodic table of elements. It is a framework that allows scientists and hobbyists to leave empty slots for biological variations they know exist or have recently discovered but haven't formally cataloged yet.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Once you attach a sequential numbering system to a luxury item, human nature takes over.
Oh, it always does.
Aang wonders out loud in the text, asking, quote, do some hardcore hobbyists actually manage to collect the entire series?
Collect the entire series?
No, I have to push back hard on this phrasing. Collect the entire series. Are we talking about living, breathing creatures here, or are we talking about an album of trading cards?
It's a very blurry line for some collectors. The phrasing completely shifts the paradigm from biological appreciation to pure consumer completionism. By applying a numbered sequence to nature, we gamify biodiversity.
Gamify biodiversity. Wow. But doesn't reducing a living creature from the Amazon basin to a sequential serial number strip away its biological majesty?
That's the million-dollar question.
Are we just turning nature into a barcode so someone can check a box on a list? It feels like the human drive to complete a series completely overshadows the appreciation of the animal itself.
We can certainly view it through a critical lens, and you're not wrong, but consider the underlying psychology driving the hardcore hobbyist. The compulsion to collect the entire series taps into a well-documented psychological phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah. The human brain is wired to remember incomplete tasks or interrupted sequences far better than completed ones.
Oh, like when a song gets stuck in your head because you only remember the chorus.
Exactly. So when a hobbyist sees they own L001, L002, and L004, their brain creates a nagging, almost unbearable cognitive itch regarding the missing L003.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The numbered system creates a manufactured void that the collector feels biologically compelled to fill.
So by giving infinite nature a finite number sequence, you make it actionable.
Right.
You give the hobbyist a roadmap of what they are missing,
Yes.
triggering those dopamine loops every time they acquire the next number in the sequence.
And the fact that the items in this series are alive, highly sensitive to water parameters, and cost over MYR 100 each, just adds an extreme layer of difficulty and prestige to the pursuit.
It's like extreme Pokemon.
Essentially, yes. The L-number system provides cognitive foothold. Without it, the sheer variety of the Pleco family is just a blur of spots and stripes. The barcode, as you called it, is what allows the human mind to process and value the biodiversity.
I see where you're going with the cognitive foothold, but it also creates a massive logistical wall.
How do you mean?
Well, these hardcore hobbyists are out there hunting down these missing L numbers, paying premium prices, and hoarding these living treasures in their private, temperature-controlled living rooms.
True.
If the spectacle is truly as amazing as Aang describes, but it is locked behind high price tags and private residential tanks, how does the rest of the world ever get to experience the biological periodic table? No single private collector has the space or resources to house thousands of premium fish.
Which is the exact logistical and philosophical bottleneck that triggers Aang's ultimate grand pitch.
The museum.
Exactly. The realization that private ownership simply cannot scale to encompass the sheer variety of this species.
Yes. This brings us to the climax of the journal entry. The entire reason Aang titled the post, Vision for a Living Pleco Museum.
It's such a brilliant leap.
Aang concludes that the current retail and private collector system is insufficient for the majesty of the animal. The text explicitly states that someone needs to step up and create a, quote, fish museum dedicated to all these unique Pleco varieties.
And Aang finishes the thought with a wonderfully definitive statement. Quote, "It would definitely be a place worth visiting."
Moving from a casual, somewhat dismissive observation about high prices in a retail store to proposing the construction of dedicated civic infrastructure is a massive escalation in thought.
It's huge. Aang is fundamentally rethinking the architecture of display.
So what does this all mean? Let's break down the difference between a standard city aquarium and the hyper-specific living museum Aang is proposing.
Okay, let's do it.
A traditional zoo or aquarium is a generalist experience. It is designed for broad appeal. You walk through and see the sharks, you see the penguins, you see the jellyfish.
Right, checking off the big hits.
Exactly. But Aang's concept reminds me of those incredibly niche, specialized museums you occasionally stumble upon while traveling.
Like a museum in a small Swiss town dedicated entirely to 18th century horology and clockwork mechanisms.
Yes, exactly.
Or a gallery space in Tokyo that exclusively exhibits one highly specific era of minimalist woodworking.
Exactly that kind of energy. When you dedicate an entire institution, an entire physical building, to one hyper-specific subset of a subject, you elevate it.
You're forcing people to pay attention to the details.
That level of extreme focus demands a completely different level of respect from the visitor. A general aquarium says, look at the variety of the ocean. A living Pleco museum says, this one single family of bottom-dwelling catfish is complex, beautiful, and vast enough to warrant your absolute undivided attention for the next 2 hours.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are witnessing a brilliant evolution in Aang's perspective within just a few short paragraphs. We can map this psychological journey perfectly.
It is a journey, for sure.
Aang begins as a highly skeptical consumer, actively repelled by the MYR 100 price tag and the barrier to entry. Then the sheer aesthetic weight of the fish forces Aang to become an awestruck observer, humbled by the cryptic L-number classification system.
And then the final form.
Yes. Finally, Aang transforms into a civic visionary, advocating for a public institution.
It is a total paradigm shift. By proposing the museum, Aang is essentially arguing for the democratization of a high-end, gate-kept hobby.
Democratization, yes.
The visual spectacle of these L numbers is simply too magnificent to be hidden away in the private, heavily filtered tanks of hardcore completionists.
Shifting the framework from a retail store to a museum does something vital. It separates the appreciation of beauty from the burden of ownership.
That's a great way to put it.
Aang recognizes that you, the listener, and anyone else off the street should be able to marvel at the biological wonder of an L046 zebra pleco without having to spend a huge portion of your paycheck to possess it.
Right.
You don't have to purchase a Monet to visit an art museum and be moved by the brushstrokes.
No, you just pay the entry fee and enjoy it.
Exactly. Aang's proposal suggests that communal observation might actually be a much healthier, more profound form of appreciation than private completionist hoarding.
Yeah, that shifts the dopamine hit from the act of acquiring a missing serial number to the act of simply experiencing the animal.
Right, taking the ego out of it.
It completely removes the Zygarde effect we talked about earlier. You aren't worried about the empty slots in your home aquarium because the museum holds the entire completed collection for you to enjoy.
This raises an incredibly important question about how our modern society interacts with the natural world. Have we become so conditioned by consumerism that we instinctively try to own the things we find beautiful?
Wow. Yeah, I think we have.
Aang's brief journal entry challenges that default setting. It asks us to imagine a space where curation replaces collection, where the goal isn't to buy the fish, but to understand it.
It is genuinely profound that all of this sprang from a short blog post written after ducking into a damp store on a rainy Tuesday.
Right?
It just proves how much philosophical depth is hiding in these little overlooked corners of the internet if you're willing to actually unpack the text.
It also speaks to the value of the non-expert perspective. Aang explicitly claims to not be a huge fan of Plecos.
Which is the irony of it all.
Right. But sometimes it takes an outsider, someone completely unburdened by the desire to collect L numbers or spend the MYR 100, to clearly see the absurdity of hoarding these creatures privately. The outsider is the one who realizes that the secret world needs to be opened up to the public.
It has been an absolute mental workout today just tracing the implications of this single entry. We started by exploring the sensory contrast of a local pet store masquerading as a high-end luxury boutique.
Yeah, that tension between casual observation and extreme premium pricing.
Exactly. We look at how premium price tags act as a psychological frame, forcing us to recognize value and aesthetic weight even when we have no desire to be the consumer.
And then we waded deep into the murky, fascinating science of the L number system.
The L numbers, yes.
Learning how the Loricaridae family requires a biological periodic table just to keep up with the pace of discovery. And we debated the psychology of completionism, examining how assigning a sequential number to a living creature can trigger a gamified quest for the hardcore hobbyist.
And finally, we arrived at Aang's brilliant, visionary pitch, the Living Pleco Museum.
The Living Pleco Museum.
A theoretical space designed to democratize wonder, taking a hyper-niche, expensive pursuit and transforming it into a public spectacle that demands our absolute respect and undivided attention, separating the joy of observation from the financial burden of ownership.
It is a remarkable progression of thought that leaves us with something vital to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
Well, if a brief, seemingly mundane journal entry, part 257 no less, from a casual observer who openly admits to not even being a fan, can so vividly conceptualize a dedicated living museum for a single specific type of bottom-dwelling fish, it forces us to reevaluate our own environments.
Oh, I like where this is going.
What hyper-niche, everyday phenomenon surrounding you, the listener, right now is secretly fascinating enough, biologically complex enough, and varied enough to deserve a dedicated museum of its own?
What are the hidden L numbers of your daily life? The deeply categorized subcultures that you just haven't noticed yet? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
Keep looking closely at the world around you, keep asking the difficult questions about how we assign value, and keep finding the spectacular hiding inside the highly specific. Because the next time you walk past a brightly lit glass case, whether it's in a high-end jewelry store or a damp local fish shop, you might just realize you're looking at the foundational exhibit of a museum that hasn't been built yet.